Aloha and welcome to E Hana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, and I'm delighted today to have someone who truly understands the heart and spirit of what Hawaii is all about. He's been a state legislator in both our House and our Senate, a total of 16 years. He's a surfing champion, one of the first world surfing champions here, who actually helped to get started the professional surfing industry. And if I were to go down his resume, we'd be here all day. Wouldn't be able to get to him. I'm so delighted to have former Senator Fred Hemmings. Fred, great to have you on board.
Aloha, Keli'i.
Aloha.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
You know, when I think about someone who understands our history, our culture, and who has deep and long roots here in Hawaii and who has served, I always think of you. And
Thank you.
I know we've had some wonderful conversations, and I just want to get right to the meat of some things. You know that right now, there are different visions of what Hawaii should be like and what society should be. And one of those visions is that there should be a separate sovereign Hawaiian nation. What do you think about what's going on in our state government with the Native Hawaiian role and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, which has started a list of people to become citizens of a sovereign Hawaiian nation on the basis of their race, that they're Hawaiian, and a political creed that says, I affirm the unrelinquished sovereignty of the Hawaiian people. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, I don't think many people or advocates of that understand what the word sovereignty means. In the Kingdom of Hawaii, there was one sovereign, the king. And starting with the earliest constitution, I believe it was 1842, under King Kamehameha III, the sovereign dominance started to erode to the point that in 1893, the people of Hawaii, and this is very important, the people of Hawaii overthrew the sovereign, which was Queen Liliuokalani, because she wanted to revert back to more of an absolute sovereign monarch. In other words, we wanted to take power away from the people and give it to one person again. So in a monarchy or a kingdom, the sovereign is one person. In a democracy and in America and in free societies, the people are sovereign. And so
now, if you're a student today at the University of Hawaii in the Hawaiian Studies Department, or at any number of public schools, you're going to hear a different history than what you just recounted. What you just told us was a tale of democracy.
Exactly.
You said the people overthrew their executive branch back in the 1890s. And that is what resulted in Queen Liliuokalani.
Well, it was even more than an executive branch, because what Queen Liliuokalani advocated in 1893, as I read history, and I've read hopefully accurate versions of it without a political agenda, was that she was advocating going back to a more absolute monarchy, which would take power away from the legislative branch. In other words, we don't need the legislature to do this because I'll do it.
Well, we use a phrase today often called executive overreach. Would you say that was an example of executive overreach?
I would say a huge overreach. And one of the things that has to be recalled is in the overthrow of the monarchy, there were numerous times throughout the history of the United Hawaiian Kingdom, which didn't come, by the way, till the Battle of Nu'uanu. Of course, that was 1798.
That's right.
1770, 95.
King Kamehameha.
King Kamehameha. There was no nation of Hawaii. It was all different vassals. You know, the Big Island had their ali'i, the Maui had Kahikili, and Oahu had Kalanikupuli, the son of Kahikili. So there were all these warring factions, and Kamehameha was able to unite them with the help of John Young and Isaac Davis, cannons, and a number of other things that Western culture had brought to the Hawaiian Islands. But the bottom line is that the Kingdom of Hawaii slowly went in a 100-year period from being an absolute monarchy with death to anybody who opposed it, because it was a very strongly ruled kingdom. People forget about that. You know, there were sacrificial heiaus where people that were enemies to the sovereign would get put to death for their political beliefs, basically. And we slowly evolved. The Kingdom of Hawaii slowly evolved into a constitutional democracy, and you know, in 1893 we became a republic without a monarchy.
In 1893, the Queen leaves the throne. In 1895, there's the formal abdication of the throne. Let me give you another statement that has been published by the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, describing this as an illegal and prolonged occupation of the Hawaiian Islands by the United States of America. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, a lot of people say that that's the case now.
Well, no, it certainly isn't the case. It's the evolution of democracy and freedom. Basically, Tsar Nicholas could say the overthrow of the Tsar was illegal. The Louis XVI could say the overthrow of France. George III could say, well, the overthrow of England when these young revolutionaries called Americans took over the colonies, which we controlled. That was illegal. The American Indians could say the occupation of North America by Europeans was an illegal overthrow of the tribal rights of. So history is full of people changing governments, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But anyone who's looking at it from the perspective is they got replaced, are going to say that, of course, the people that replaced them are illegal.
Well, where do people go in order to get a more accurate history of Hawaii, especially today when there are so many teachers, so many institutions that are promoting the idea of this illegal occupation and illegal overthrow?
Well, you go to legitimate historic
sources,
right? Such as Kuykendall's History of Hawaii,
right.
Gavin Dawes in Australia with no vested interest in local politics. He wrote a condensed version, Shoal of Time. There are a number of very scholarly, and David Mullo and other Hawaiian authors.
That's right, even Hawaiians.
Even Hawaiians have written very accurate, especially when it comes to ancient Hawaii, very accurate renditions of how people lived and the history and the evolution of their cultures and the history and evolution of Hawaii from a absolute monarchy. Well, actually, not even before a monarchy. We were a tribal kingdom where there was no unification. There's even a very interesting book, it's called A Separate Kingdom, that puts forth the legal case that since the island of Kauai was never conquered by Kamehameha, they just had a reciprocity agreement. You Kamehameha, sure, you run the Hawaiian Islands, we'll let you call yourself king, but we, Kamoli'i, the king of Kauai, said, I'm running Kauai, and that's the end of the story. And there was no conquest of Kauai or ceding of Kauai to the kingdom as an official part of the Hawaiian kingdom. You could say that Kauai is not part of Hawaii, if you wanted to get technical.
Recently, I was at the University of Hawaii Richardson Law School talking to some Native Hawaiian law students who were there, funded by the Native Hawaiian Law Corporation as well as the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And we started to talk about Hawaiian history. And they were of the opinion that the coming of the West to Hawaii, and in specific Christianity, resulted in great harm and damage to the Hawaiian culture, and that we should return to a pre-Western contact kind of culture. Do you have any thoughts about this? I tried to discuss to them the historical basis of this.
I'm sorry that you brought this up, because it is just so replete of common sense and of any type of semblance of civilization. My God, anybody read David Mullo, read the other Hawaiian authors, read any other history of Hawaii. Let me give you an example. In 1795, Kamehameha landed 600 canoes, they say, on the beaches of Oahu, and they engaged in a battle right here at Punch Bowl and fought up Nu'uanu Valley. In the course of the battle, many of the ali'i of Oahu, they abandoned the battle. They said, hey, we're losing here. And there was a great cannon fire, and it killed the chief Hawaiian Kaiana. The remainder of Kalani Kapuli's forces that stood and fought to the end got driven over the Pali. There's maybe 300 or 400 people got driven over the edge of the Pali. The rest of them escaped. Kamehameha I rounded up all the ali'i of Oahu, including Kalani Kapuli. And he took them down to a heiau at Diamond Head called Papa'enaena, and he clubbed them all to death, every one of them. And the reason was he didn't want anybody laying claim to say, well, I am the official, right, my kingdom was stolen from me, which is echoes of what people are saying today. So technically you can say that, Oahu was illegally overthrown by Kamehameha, in a much more gruesome way, though. And then if you read about the human sacrifice in pre-contact Hawaii, before the Christians got here. It is absolutely gruesome, not only in sacrificing humans, but in the way they did it. I mean, it was terrible.
And what you
infanticide.
There you go.
They practiced infanticide.
That's right.
There's a sacred site that's really quite fascinating that out near Wahiwa, built in the middle of what used to be the pineapple fields, and it's surrounded by modern trees. And it's called Kukani Loko, and it is a sacrificial site, but it's also where the queen came and had their babies. And it's a very sacred, it's called the Pico of the Island. And you can see the rocks there have been formed and were used for something. But if a baby was born, especially in the ruling class, with a deformity, they'd kill it, right there.
Well, there has been such a transition in quality of life for the average common person since the coming of Western values and Christianity that it's really an irresponsible claim to say that these factors, the West, Christianity, the United States, are responsible for the victimization of the Hawaiian people. I'll tell you what makes me even sadder is that I was dealing with postgraduates. I was dealing with college graduates who were now law school students who didn't seem to have the critical capacity to go to history and extract an objective history, who are there now in law school, steeped in ideology, and that's a deep concern to me.
They're not steeped in ideology as much as they're steeped in emotion, and they have not been educated; they've been indoctrinated, and they're operating off ill-conceived feelings rather than facts.
Sure.
Here's how I feel rather than here's what I know.
We're going to take a quick break, and in all fairness, I've told you just a story of a few students whom I encountered at the Richardson Law School. They do not by any means reflect or represent the quality of many fine students at Richardson, and I have many friends who are graduates of that institution. But they reflect a growing trend, I think, here in Hawaii, that we're moving away from what accurate history is all about. When we return, I'm going to ask Fred to give us some of his thoughts on the good things about Hawaii. He's very much active as an ambassador for Hawaii across the world, attracting people to what is truly attractive about the Aloha State. And we'll be right back with Fred Hemmings after this short message. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, and you're watching ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Yamashita, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And urban transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Thank you.
Aloha and welcome back to E Hana Kako. We're a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'd like to say thanks to Jay Fidel, the producer of this program and producer of up to 20 hours of original content that come from the studio and go across the world. And if you're watching from anywhere else than Hawaii, we welcome you to come here to downtown Honolulu and visit us, and you help build our economy and we'll help build yours. In addition to that, I want you to know that E Hana Kako, the name of this program, is what we say at the Grassroots Institute. There's a venerable saying, E Pule Kako, which means let's pray Kako all together. E Hana Kako means let's work all together. And with that, I want to go back to Senator Fred Hemmings, because you have promoted the idea of everyone working together here in the Aloha spirit, because there is so much good that we can do if we put our mind on solutions.
Kako e pluribus unum.
Yes.
Out of many, we are
there
one.
You go.
And there's isn't there a great connection between e pluribus unum and Kako?
Absolutely, from the many one.
Yeah.
And let's work together.
Exactly, let's pull together. And I think that's probably one of the most important messages that I'd like to get out to your viewership and to the people of Hawaii is that there are solutions to every problem we have here in Hawaii. And if we work together, we can find them. And there's a lot of mischaracterization and misrepresentation, outright falsehoods about Hawaiian history and other things for people with a political agenda. And usually the political agenda is not for the betterment of Hawaii, it's for the betterment of themselves. You know, I'm going to make a new situation where I'm going to be the guy that's going to tell you. And one of the big misconceptions is the victimization of Hawaiians. Hawaiians, in many instances, aren't victims; they're victorious.
Well, I think of Hawaiians, yes, some who happen to live on the streets, but others, it's like Senator Akaka, Governor John Waihee III. There are wealthy businessmen. There are educators. There are people who are doctors and lawyers, and tens of thousands of graduates of the Kamehameha schools who've gone on to university.
Precisely.
We rarely talk about these Hawaiians and how most of them own homes and are making a living and raising their children, sending them to college. Not to deny the fact that we have a homelessness problem, but there is a stereotype of the Hawaiian as being a victim. And Fred, I'm glad you mentioned that's not what you've seen.
It's tremendously sad. And if you open up your eyes, Hawaiians aren't victims. They're victorious. One of the most wonderful families in Hawaii, benevolent, sharing, caring, and with a lot of assets, and they do an excellent job of sharing those assets, is Campbell Estate. Well, the heirs of Campbell Estate are Hawaiian.
There
James
you go.
Campbell was married to a Hawaiian princess. One of the largest privately owned ranch in the world for 100 years was Parker Ranch. It's Hawaiian ranch. So there are Hawaiians who have really made a big difference in the quality of life of their fellow Hawaiians. Kamehameha School's Bishop Estate is just a shining example of that.
Absolutely.
And what an asset that is, and how lucky we are to have Kamehameha School's Bishop Estate. But those children have to be taught that we're all living in this society together, and we got to figure out ways. And when you talk about the homeless, you know, I don't know what the ethnic breakdown of the homeless are, but certainly the Hawaiians don't have a franchise in homelessness. There's, you know, I see a lot of other races that are homeless too, and homelessness is usually associated with addictions of some sort, you know, whether it be alcohol, drugs, or mental disabilities.
Certainly.
Very few people are homeless for economic reasons.
Well, you know, here in the state of Hawaii, you say that there are so many good things to look at that create solutions, both for Hawaiians and non-Hawaiians. What are some of those good things here in the state of Hawaii?
Well, you know, for instance, I would have loved to have seen a bill introduced to address the unemployment compensation problem with unemployment, and a bill that would create jobs. And right now we're giving, and we keep extending it, people who can't find a job in a bad economy.
Right.
We have an onerous economy here. Hard to get jobs. We have single industry economy, tourism. Rather than giving them unemployment compensation, give them an employment voucher which they could take to a business, and the business can cash that in, get the money, and the business by law would have to match whatever that's worth. In other words, the voucher's worth $400 in unemployment compensation, which the business would get. The business would have to throw another $400 in plus health insurance to employ the person. So everybody wins. The business gets an employee at half the cost of employing them. The employee gets a job with a decent salary rather than just the unemployment compensation, and the taxpayers take someone who's on the dole.
What a great idea.
Yeah, there are these common sense solutions, but I'll tell you what doesn't work. 100% proved time in and time again what doesn't work, and it's a cliche, and I'm sorry for using it, Hawaii, but doing the same thing, expecting different results, doesn't work. And we did it again this election. We elected the same people who are going to do the same thing, and then we're going to sit back and say, oh, well, you know, we'll create another industry. Let me tell you another thing, too. Whenever they try to create, and I was in the legislature when this whole idea of we're going to become one of the tech centers of the world.
Right.
You know, we're going to be the Silicon Valley of the Pacific. And what they did was they said, okay, we're going to pass a big, massive waiving of taxes for tech industry until they get on their feet. And the tech industry looked at Hawaii and said, well, we'll get our taxes waived for a year, but the minute we start making money, we'll be back in tax hell, you know, which is Hawaii's been referred to. But what that advocacy by the people in power of waiving taxes was really admission of guilt. What they're saying to you, yes, the tax environment is so bad in Hawaii, it deters business. And we, you know, God bless Hawaii, we're so fortunate, but we only have one industry, and it's called tourism. The second industry in Hawaii, the second biggest industry, recently passed away, and it was the beloved Dan Inouye, whom I just thought was the greatest guy in the world as a leader of Hawaii. He was a modern day elite.
Right.
But he's gone, and you know, slowly but surely, all the things that we haven't seen it reflected in the newer budgets in Congress, but he brought a lot of assets to Hawaii that I don't see these people there now being able to do.
That's interesting that you talk about the industry of Dan Inouye, by which you're referring to the extent to which federal funding, whether it's through the military or the support for institutions, educational funding, and so forth, the extent to which that federal funding comes to us. And so we're beyond that era is moving on.
Yeah, our number one industry, and you know, my numbers are from when I was in the legislature, and I think it was like 12 or 14 billion dollars. Is tourism. Tourism generates our single biggest revenue source. The second biggest revenue source in Hawaii, sadly, is federal spending, and that federal spending was tied to the ability and the respect that Dan Inouye had. Dan Inouye would bring money to Hawaii that otherwise should have gone to San Diego or gone to Guam or gone somewhere else where it made more logical sense. But just through the sheer leadership abilities of Dan Inouye, that money came to Hawaii. That guy he's my hero, man. I tell you, there's no better political leader. And he was, you know, he's very balanced. You know, he treated everybody based on the merit of their abilities, not on their political label.
What do you think the solution will be now that we move beyond running after federal funding? If that, for the reason of Dan Inouye's passing away, as well as the shrinking size of the federal pie across the nation, if that's going to be the future, what do you tell venture capitalists in China or Japan or South Korea and elsewhere to bring them here to invest in this economy? Well, what's one of the good things about Hawaii?
Unfortunately, from my perception, unless we change the business environment and make it more conducive to productivity and profit. Profit is a maligned word.
Sure.
And profit is, and I like to define profit, honest profit is the fuel of a healthy economy. But to the people that are anti-capitalist and anti-free enterprise and want a socialistic government, profit's a bad word. And profit's what corporations use to create jobs and create salaries and opportunities.
And provide IRAs and pension plans and the average the person's compensation.
And pay raises for unions.
There you go.
It comes right out of profit. And the minute we start abandoning the principles of free market practices, we're doomed for problems, which we are having. So you ask me to put on my my Nostradamus shirt and tell me what's going to happen in the future. Unless we change the business environment here through reform of tax burdens and reform of regulations, nothing's going to happen here. We're going to continue to stagnate at best, and we will never have a burgeoning new business enterprise that's going to really support our economy the way it needs to.
So even if we have creative innovation, entrepreneurship, like the super ferry that we attempted to establish at one time, the regulatory environment needs to be transformed.
Well, the regulatory and the tax and the political environment.
Situation.
Let me share this with you. The super ferry, it's not here. We don't have any meaningful geothermal, which back in the 80s I supported. It never happened. We don't have economic diversity. We don't. There's a syndrome we have here in Hawaii, and it's called the just say no syndrome. The people of Molokai, 56% of them or something like that are on some sort of government entitlement, and they won't let any business go there. A cruise line wanted to stop and bring people on shore, and they would have spent money and they would have gone on the boat and left, which is great. Just leave your money here and take off.
It's kind of like that old metaphor for a church committee: one steering wheel and 12 sets of brakes.
Exactly. And so we just say no to all these things, and unfortunately we never have had the political leadership to say, no, wait a minute. This is like 30 years ago. We need geothermal. We need to break up the Hawaiian Electric monopoly on the energy field. We need to get a diversification of energy. We're going to have it happen. We need super ferry, and they allowed one state senator on Kauai and a bunch of surfers to block super ferry from coming in complete violation of federal maritime law, and they didn't do anything about it. So we just keep saying no, 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 no. We don't want this. We don't want that, rather than saying, hey, let's figure out a way to make it work.
How do we bring about this kind of political change so that there is the leadership that will bring people along into a much more yes mindset rather than a no mindset?
Well, unfortunately, the no mindset is usually a minority. I think even major organized labor leaders understand that we cannot continue on the path we have, because eventually we're going to end up, you know, the last economic slowdown, which was due to the savings and loan collapse on a national level, 2008, that really affected organized labor too. Even public employees, who usually, you know, enjoy quite a lot of support budget-wise at the legislature, there were cutbacks there too. So it's not, we're not living in a us against them economy. We're all in this thing together. You know, if we cut taxes for everybody, everybody benefits, including business. Then business creates more jobs, then labor has more jobs to work at, everybody wins. And so we really, and I'm making a direct appeal to organized labor, let's work together and find a formula where we can create a very fertile economic environment where we can create more jobs and more industry.
Absolutely. We've got about 30 seconds before the break, so I'm going to put you on the spot. Hawaii will, in 2015, have a new governor. What would you tell him is the #1 thing he needs to do? And then we'll take a break.
I think he has to really look at government spending and figure out ways to spend money more efficiently and cut spending where we don't need to. And they hate this word, but it can be done in a way that doesn't threaten jobs, is privatize. The private sector can do a better job oftentimes for less money. So let's take a look at it.
Well, you've heard that from Senator Fred Hemmings, who served in our state legislature in both houses for 16 years and who has a wonderful grasp of Hawaiian history, where we've been and also where we're going. When we come back for the final segment of E Hana Kako, which means let's work together, I'm going to ask Senator Hemmings if he'll tell us a little bit about what he sees taking place in the political environment in Hawaii. We recently had the threat of 2 hurricanes, but do we have winds of change in the making? I'm Keli'i Akina. We'll be right back after this short break. Don't go away.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back to the final segment of today's E Hana Kako program, which means let's work together. My guest today is Senator Fred Hemmings. We've been touching upon a broad variety of topics, and we're going to conclude by talking about something that's a favorite topic of myself and Senator Hemmings, and that's politics in Hawaii. And so without any further ado, winds of change, do you see them coming? Senator Inouye, an institution, and as you've said, an industry in himself, passed away. Senator Akaka retired. We see a long-term political figure and a one-term governor dethroned just hours ago. What do you see taking place here in Hawaii, which has been for the past half a century really dominated by one political party? Winds of change?
No, same party dominates. There'll be some facades that will be changed, but basically the underlying modus operandi of state government will continue.
What are the elements? I mean, what are the powers that exist in that structure? The unions?
Well, I think the power base of the people in power now is definitely the organized labor unions who've tried to create a workers' paradise here that benefits workers. And the sad irony of all of it is that the people in power are supposed to be for the quote-unquote little guy, and statistically, we're one of the most regressive states in the nation. I think it was second only to Alabama when I was in the legislature for taxing the poor. The excise tax is really, really cruel, 4.5% on food. We're one of the few states in the nation that taxes people for being hungry, food. We're one of the few states in the nation for taxes people for being sick. And the excise tax is extremely regressive. So if you really wanted to help people, get the yoke of overtaxation off their back and allow them to keep the money they've worked so hard to earn, and find ways to incentivize productivity rather than dependency. You know, at the national level, we had a president who won re-election who celebrated how many people were on food stamps. You know, I'm taking care of 7 million more people on food stamps now, and to me, that's a tragedy that more people have to rely on a paltry handout for their food from the United States government. And what's even more ironic about it is one branch of government, the Department of Health at the federal level, is telling people not to eat junk food.
Right.
And another branch is handing out food stamps, or what they call SNAP, supplemental
That's right.
nutritional, that's buying junk food. In other words, with food stamps, you can buy junk food. So we're paying for it on one hand, and the other part of government saying don't eat canned soda and don't eat chips and don't eat this, that, and the other thing, and then you can turn around and buy it with a food stamp card.
So you don't see that the basic substructure of Hawaii politics has changed? And,
Not at all.
And in this election, what are your thoughts about any resurgence of the Republican Party as a viable opposition party?
I don't see it happening in the near future. The Republican Party has got two problems. One, it's got a public relations problem. Its imagery dates back to the plantation era. You know, wealthy Howleys exploiting the people of Hawaii is sum total of it, and nothing could be further from the truth. And then the second problem, I think, is just more rudimentary, and it's rudimentary to the country. Right here in Hawaii, there's more people getting something from government than giving it, and they pretty much control the roost. If you're getting, for instance,
Your pension, for
your
example.
pension or your free medical care, or if you're getting food stamps or things, you're not going to vote for people that want to adjust the system.
And from multiple layers of government, federal, military, city and county, state.
And for the working people, let me explain this one thing to you that I remember from my days in the legislature. Right now you can get the government to pay for your health care and or food, or both usually, and you can have hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets because the law is written in such a way that it's based on earned income. So if you can show low earned income and divert your income to your estranged spouse and live together or something like that, or just basically misrepresent it, you can own a house. It says, oh, we can't take someone's house away. So you can have a house with $500,000 equity in it, and you can own a Cadillac Escalade, and you can have personal assets like jewelry that's worth a lot of money, and you can get free medical care or free food stamps. And some poor working guy who's living in an apartment in Keli'i, who's paying his taxes, who rides the bus to work, is paying taxes without getting free food and medical care, and they're paying taxes so people who have $500,000 in assets can get something. Those are the laws we have to change.
Now, Fred, when I hear you, I hear the spirit of compassion. I hear a commitment to the little guy, not the corporate monger and so forth. And so what is the public image problem you're talking about with Republicans? And you are a Republican and have been with that party. Why do people not hear the compassion you're speaking with?
Because the majority in power have done such a good job, public relations-wise, of misrepresenting facts to the people of Hawaii. Trust us, give us all the power, give us all your money, and we'll take care of you. And I like to ask Hawaii, are you being taken care of? Do you like the traffic? Do you like public infrastructure? Do you like the public schools? Do you like all the other economic opportunities you have in Hawaii? If so, then you voted for the right guys. If you don't, vote for change. But what the people in power have been able to do is they've been able to convince through very adroit campaigning. And I mean, look at the last mayoral election, and look what they did to Ben Cayetano. Ben Cayetano is a wonderful, wonderful leader because you know why? Because he's an independent thinker. He's not letting ideology, blind allegiance to a certain political doctrine, blind his. He said we cannot afford a rail system. The unions went in the dirtiest campaign I've ever seen. They say, oh, we don't talk stinking Hawaii. Are you kidding me? That what they did to Ben was unconscionable. Those union ads, those PRP ads, those were unconscionable. They were mean-spirited. They were false in my estimation. And Ben got beat mostly because of those ads. And the people of Hawaii bought into it. They look at the ad, oh, that's true, Ben, oh yeah, we don't need the rail. Well, the rail's going to be one of the deep abysses economically that is going to continue to haunt us for generations and generations. And it's going to be one of the reasons why Hawaii is going to be in further economic peril. We just can't afford it. And they say, what, $5-6 billion to build it? Well, by the time it gets built, it's going to be $10 billion, and it's going to be an unfunded future liability, which we have one of the states with the highest per capita unfunded future debt of any state.
So let's say you're advising the minority party. Let's say you are in a role of exalted sage.
Exalted sage. My gosh.
What are you going to tell them to do?
Coalition. I've got the one word would describe what we need to do in order to change things in Hawaii, and it's not going to come from the Republican Party. It's going to come from a coalition of people from all different ethnic and cultural and economic places in Hawaii.
And political.
That say, we want to work together to address the basic problems of the economy and of the ability of government to really do a good job of taking care of us, of educating our kids, of taking care of the truly needy by getting rid of the truly greedy, of doing the basics. And we need to reach out. We need to tolerate in the coalition of people that we may not agree with on certain things, but overall we do.
Are you saying we need to move away from basing our loyalties on party or on ethnicity, and instead move around the issues and what's good for Hawaii?
We gotta stop. And this is probably the Republicans' biggest problem, is they always find things they disagree with their fellow Republican and argue over it rather than finding
the purity of the doctrine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the absolutist. It's got to be this way or no way. And what we got to do is find things we agree on and build from there, not build down because we disagree on. You know, I'll give you one issue: the social issue of abortion. Well, you know, everybody has strong feelings on that, but that's not the issue that's destroying Hawaii. What's destroying Hawaii is the economy and the cost of living and the cost of taxation and the poor function of government. I mean, our highways, this is the Garden of Eden. We're blessed with such beauty here. And if you go on our highways, there's weeds, there's graffiti. I mean, it's terrible. Our public infrastructure it's terrible. So later on, it's going to start to affect our number one industry. People say, "Oh, Hawaii's sure polluted and dirty." You know? You know, we don't get natural pollution because it all blows away in the sense of fog or not fog, car emissions of carbon dioxide. We get visual pollution with the poor upkeep of public infrastructure.
Now, if leadership in any party or a coalition is able to focus on the right message, the right need, what about the voter turnout here in Hawaii? The lowest in the nation, we've been told, and now our primary reflects that again.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Either cause and effect. What are your thoughts on that?
I think people have given up. I think a great number of people would like to see some fundamental changes. Feel disenfranchised. Say, I'm not going to bother because it's not going to make any difference. The status quo will continue to win, and so why vote? And that's so sad. But I really, if I was in the governor's seat as a Republican or as a conservative, the first thing I'd do is I'd organize a regular meeting with organized labor. And I'd like to sit down with the Randy Pereiras of the world, the head of the HGA, the head of UPW, and the head of the government unions first and foremost, but even the private unions, say, look, we're all in this economy together. We all live in Hawaii together. We all have the same hopes and aspirations. Let's figure out a ways to work together rather than saying, oh, it's them against us. And let's figure out a ways to overcome the just say no syndrome.
Well, that's quite interesting. The council you speak of for the collaboration for communication is so different than the frame of reference of negotiation in terms of wages and conditions and so forth. That is basically a confrontational model.
The whole thing is designed
so you're calling
them
for,
against us.
You're calling for a forum that seeks cooperation.
Well, one of the things that I tell my labor friends is, you don't live in an isolated economy. When you go and pay $5 for a half gallon of milk or whatever you pay for a loaf of bread, that's 3 times what it costs in the mainland. When you pay 37 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity when the average on the mainland is 12 cents, that hurts labor as much as it hurts the rest of us. So it's not like organized labor lives in a separate economy. we all live in this economy together, and what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You know, we all got to work together to make it better for everybody.
You know, one of the issues that I know you feel needs some negotiation at the labor union level is our protectionist shipping laws, the Jones Act and so forth. But how do you make headway? And I don't want to get technical on the Jones Act. How do you make headway with something that has been so much a part of union doctrine or a party doctrine? How would
No, I wouldn't blame unions on that.
Okay, good.
I wouldn't blame unions in this case. It happens to be one of Hawaii's big monopolies, and it's Matson.
All right, there you go.
Matson loves the Jones Act because it keeps their exclusivity, helps keep their exclusivity in Honolulu Harbor. I don't think the labor unions should get blamed at all.
How do we bring any shift in monopoly culture?
Well, a wise person recently told me that you make an exemption for the Jones Act. You don't change the Jones Act per se across the board.
In other words, you don't bring down the unions or the monopolies themselves.
You say give Hawaii an exemption so that we can afford to have transportation alternatives, number one, and competition in the marketplace so we can ship things for cheaper. That is one of the hidden taxes of Hawaii. Now, it's not a direct tax, but what we pay to the reason why our goods and products cost more here is not because they were shipped 2,000 miles from the West Coast. It's because of all the additional costs we pay in direct taxing and hidden taxes, such as the Jones Act. If an orange is grown in California, it should cost no more in Hawaii Safeway than it does in Safeway in New York City. It's the same distance, but it does. So, you know, we're paying a premium, not because of our distance from commodities that could be sold, but because of taxes and hidden costs of transportation.
Final 30 seconds. Talk to the citizens of Hawaii, the people who've seen it all, been through it all, and most of whom are staying home rather than going to the polls.
Well, we're blessed we live in a democracy, and we're also blessed that we live in Hawaii, and though we're paying a great cost to live in Hawaii, we have some things here in Hawaii that money can't buy. The beauty of our state, and mostly the beauty of our people. There still is something called aloha spirit in the individual citizen. We care for each other, and we oftentimes reach out and help the less fortunate in our society. But we have to pull together to create a better economic environment that lifts all the boats in Hawaiian waters. And doing the same thing and expecting different results is not going to do it. So I plead with you, when you cast your very important, blood was paid for, death created an opportunity of the right to vote. When you cast that vote, do it with your heart and do it with your mind. Think about what you're voting for. Don't vote for business as usual. Vote for enlightened change.
Fred, thank you very much, Senator Hemmings, for joining us today. What a great program, and I could go on for hours talking with Fred Hemmings. I hope you've been enlightened by our look at history and into the future, and take the wisdom that has been shared today. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, signing off, saying thanks to Jay Fidel and the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Until next time on E Hana Kako, let's work together, and we'll be right back here next week. Aloha.